We're not going to start from scratch today with a brand new clean GitHub repository, and I have reasons for that. You see, the questions of how and what you should configure in your repo depend a lot on what kind of code and what kind of project you're managing in that repo. So instead, I co-opted an existing GitHub repository for a project that I used in another video. It's for a ChatGPT full stack project called Marv the Sarcastic Chatbot. Marv's a lot of fun, and I put a link to him in the video description down below. If you're ambitious and you're into generative AI, then you should try to build and deploy the project to your own URL. It's customizable and it runs on serverless gear from AWS that's basically free. This is a big video and we're going to cover a lot of material. So let's hit this in 3 broad strokes. First, paying attention to the details. Second, automating stuff that's important. And finally, helping others understand your project. Oh, hey, wait, there's something else, a bonus. We're going to be looking at CI/CD automations using GitHub Actions, which is really cool, but that's not the bonus. The code that we're using today integrates the OpenAI API, and that's cool, but that's not the bonus either. No, the bonus is that ChatGPT got hit with a DDoS attack while I was doing the screen recordings for this video. And so you're not only going to learn how to set up automated CI/CD, but you're also going to see what happens to that CI/CD when it crosses paths with some rebellious digital warriors. Let's get into it. Two great reasons to put serious effort into setting up your GitHub repo. The best reason is that you're gainfully employed on a coding project and you'd like things to stay that way. But another best reason is that you're not gainfully employed on a coding project, but you'd like to be. And you've got some amazing code samples to show the world. In whichever of these two you happen to find yourself, a well-organized, properly configured repository will lead to higher quality, more reliable code that's easier for others to understand and make use of. A well-organized, well-maintained repo exudes competence. It's an important way for outsiders to gain confidence in your project, regardless of whether they're coworkers, collaborators, potential clients, or employers. This is about putting your best face forward with regard to the code that you create and how you present it to the rest of the world. There, of course, are practical reasons for everything I'm about to show you, but frankly, sometimes you're selling the sizzle and not the steak, and this is one of those times. Before you dive into any rabbit holes trying to automate stuff or create built-in policies, you first need a clear-headed understanding of what's inside your project. On a lot of projects that I work on, you'd be surprised. It's actually pretty elusive. But a great tool that I found for surfacing what's really truly inside a code base is clock. That's a command line tool that means count lines of code. Check it out, install it. You'll probably be surprised by its output for your own project. Here's the raw, unfiltered results for today's repo. Link in the video description down below, by the way. The project itself is React.js on the front end, Python on the back end, and Terraform for the AWS infrastructure. But look at all this other stuff. The short story here is that in a lot of cases, Python code is used to wrap other kinds of pre-existing code like Fortran and C. It's been around for a really long time. It's known to be both reliable and performant. So a fair amount of these other technologies, they're actually buried down inside the Python virtual environment and also the Node.js modules. Understanding what you're actually working with is your starting point. The what should you do next part for your repo, that should logically follow what you learned from generating a clock report. Opinionated code formatters are a thing, and you should get accustomed to using them if you expect to have any hope of anyone else willingly reviewing your code. Coworker, boss, prospective employer, collaborator, it doesn't matter. If the formatting of your code is inconsistent with what they were expecting, they'll probably tune out and you'll lose them. This isn't about functionality. This is about making your code understandable for others and making your project look professional. There are great publicly available code linters and formatters. This project uses several, actually. For React, I'm using the default linting tools that were set up by Vite.js when I scaffolded the React app. For Python, I'm using Black and Flake 8, where Black is the formatter and Flake 8 is a style policy enforcer that looks not only for what's there, but also what's not there but should be. For Terraform, I'm using the default Terraform linter tool that's built into Terraform itself. For Markdown, I'm using a VS Code extension named Markdown Lint. Yeah, there's a formatter for Markdown. And for JSON and YAML files, I'm using a VS Code extension named Prettier. Momentarily, we're going to get these utilities wired into our workflow so that they run automatically at the right times. Documentation matters a lot, and you've no doubt already heard that, but what you document and how matters just as much. Reading code in established projects with lots of contributors will help you to get a sense of what kinds of things merit documentation and what's considered normal in terms of how much documenting to do and how to style it. Style varies from one coding ecosystem to the next, but regardless, I generally lean towards too much rather than too little. But either way, you want to stay within the accepted boundaries for your ecosystem. JavaScript and Python are generally self-documenting, and that obviates the needs for lots of inline commenting. But what you put in the headers of your modules, functions, and class definitions is important. So take note of the conventions for these and other projects that are in your ecosystem. For most projects, an important prerequisite to automating anything is to set up a systematic way to manage the credentials and sensitive information that your code provides to external services. Most popular programming languages understand the concept of .env files, so they're simple to set up once you've seen an example like this one. It's a conventional approach that others already know and understand, so using a .env in your project is a great way to showcase your sophistication as a developer to the outside world without you having to make a big show of it. It's a telltale sign to other developers that you know what you're doing. A .env file is a simple text file that you create inside your repo to give you a way to locally store your sensitive data in a way that doesn't involve pushing this data to GitHub and publicly exposing it. Yikes! Be aware that you'll need to add an entry to a .gitignore in the root of your repo in order for Git to not include the .env file itself in your commits. You'll also need to take care of the language-specific setup. In this case, we're using the helper PyPI package .env, and I've added code blocks to the Python modules that look for and consume the contents of this file, assuming that it exists. Contrastingly, React code in this project interacts with a publicly accessible API, so we don't have to worry about a .env for this part of the project. And speaking of .gitignore, there actually are a ton of other things that you should never be pushing to GitHub. This is partly about helping you to not look like a newbie in GitHub, but it's also about helping you to run a tight ship and avoiding doing weird things like pushing cache files and intermediate runtime artifacts that would lead to others inadvertently downloading this when they clone your repo and then potentially causing weird, really hard to diagnose problems. If your project includes Python code, then consider setting up a tox.ini. It's a Python-specific multi-purpose configuration file, but broadly speaking, everything inside of tox.ini has something to do with Python unit testing and QA. This tox.ini has entries that help to fine-tune how Flake 8 behaves and whether or not it complains about any of a multitude of rules. There's also stuff in here about GitHub Actions, which we'll talk about momentarily, and miscellaneous Python code management utilities that are implemented, and all of which we'll at least mention at some point in this video. It's an important part of fine-tuning the automations that you're about to see because they'll fail if your code breaks any of these styling rules. In addition to setting up .env, you also should check out the GitHub Secrets service. The main reason to use GitHub Secrets is to be able to automatically inject passwords and sensitive data into your GitHub Actions workflows. It's a great feature and it's free. You can see that there are multiple ways to create secrets. I'm using organization-wide secrets, which are nice because I can set these up once and then I can kind of forget about them until they're near their expiration date. We don't have time today to delve into the finer points, but definitely check these out. All right, onwards to the cool stuff. Automating stuff that's important. About a week ago, I started retrofitting this repo with all the stuff that I wanted to cover in today's video. And I think it's important to disclaim that it's basically taken me a week of iterations and trial and error to get everything you're about to see working the way that you're about to see. And mind you, I've been doing this for a long time. It's all about getting the details right. It takes time, it takes patience, and tenacity. The first and single most important automation-related thing that you need to do is to set up branch protection rules. These are important enough that GitHub actually added a big green call to action button to repos that are lacking these. As the name would suggest, branch protection rules help to prevent your automations from inadvertently destroying stuff inside the repo. Get these set up first so that when you do go to work automating things, you'll limit your worst case scenario on mistakes to just not making any forward progress on your project as opposed to, oh my God, what have I done? Make is a command line tool for automating administrative tasks in your repo. It's included in Linux distributions and it's bundled into Xcode's command line tools for Mac OS. I'm sure it's easily installable on Windows as well, but unfortunately I don't know anything about that. Makefiles are descendants of Unix and they've been around since the 1970s. The makefile in this project, it's pretty extensive because the repo itself contains 2 complete projects, one for the React.js front end and another for the Python REST API backend. And you know, I should probably add a third section for the Terraform code since that's half the code base. There's a right way to go about writing these makefiles, and frankly, it's kind of Byzantine because that's how Unix programmers rolled 50 years ago when they wrote this stuff. My recommendation is for you to just copy this one and then prune it down to what you actually need. But one pro tip is keep the help output that you see at the bottom because your users are going to need to figure out how to call commands. Plus, the gray-haired coders will all assume that you've done this, and a lot of the time, they're the ones making the hiring decisions. I didn't run across pre-commit until a few years ago, but I wish I'd known about it sooner. There's all this stuff that, as an ostensibly responsible programmer, you're supposed to remember all this stuff before you commit the code. But it's so much stuff, and it's hard to remember everything every time. And at any rate, it's hard to stay focused on the minutia when you're trying to put out a bonfire. This is where pre-commit comes in. It's user configurable, and you can set it up to run tons of checks on your code base just before the actual commit happens. It can check for all kinds of gotchas, as well as ensuring that the various code formatters have all been run and stuff like that. Pre-commit is hands down one of the best tools that you can add to your project, from avoiding disasters like accidentally pushing your AWS CLI key pair to simply ensuring that everyone on your team follows a consistent set of formatting and linting rules. Okay, we're going to bundle a whole bunch of things together now since all the rest of this stuff, it's kind of joined at the hip. But just to ensure that none of us gets lost in the weeds, here's what we're about to cover. GitHub Actions. This is a mostly free GitHub service that gives you a fantastic way to run automated workflow jobs on and about your code in a controlled environment. And that last part about controlled environment, that's important. These are typically used to automate testing and build and deployment workflows, but you can also use them to automate chores like checking and updating version pins for NPM, PyPI, Terraform, and any other libraries that are used by your code. Topically, this is way out of scope for this video, but they and automated unit testing in general are an integral part of what we're about to look at. I'll probably do a video about automated Python and React unit testing at some point in the near future, so stay tuned. Dependabot was acquired by GitHub in 2019. It's a free version checker updater service that's tightly integrated to GitHub and more specifically to GitHub Actions. Basically, all you have to do is set up a dependabot.yaml config file inside of the special folder named .github, and then the service will run itself automatically. It creates PRs with version bumps as it detects new releases of the packages that your project uses. It's pretty cool. This project uses Dependabot for NPM, for Python, and for Terraform. A word of caution though, it takes time and effort to get this kind of automation stuff configured correctly and working right. I added Dependabot to this repo like 4 days ago, and I'm still making little tweaks here and there. Yesterday morning, for example, I noticed that I was only getting PRs for one of the 2 Python virtual environments. So upon inspection, I learned of a small syntax error in the dependabot.yaml file, and it was causing it to break midway through the execution. I don't want to over-dramatize this, but it is illustrative of the kind of things that you'll only learn about by getting hands-on with the service, implementing it, and iterating with it. Mergify is a mostly free cloud service that can work in concert with Dependabot to automatically evaluate and approve certain PRs that you designate. That's what we're doing in this project, by the way. Dependabot creates PRs for version bumps, and then Mergify allows some of these to be automatically approved and merged into the main branch. So the basic idea is that for the most important yet mundane stuff, like say minor version bumps to major packages, everything happens as a 100% automated nocturnal process. So the idea is that the next morning when you wake up, all this boring stuff has all been taken care of for you. Semantic versioning is a thing. You should Google it, read about it, and get up to speed on it. For any NPM or PyPI or app or yum or brew or whatever package manager managed package, you typically see a number expressed in 3 parts: a major, minor, patch release. In light of this being so systematic, it opens the possibility for automating how the package release process happens in this project. This project is leveraging a third-party project named Semantic Release, and that takes care of packaging and releasing new versions of your software. Note that it relies on your commit messages conforming to a really strict style guideline. It reads the commit messages to make decisions about what version number to use for the next release. It also generates your changelog entries, and that is super nice. Okay, that's the stuff we're about to cover. But here's our situation. A couple of days ago, when I started to prepare for this video, I took a look at the GitHub Actions for this repo, whereupon I was expecting to see a bunch of completed workflows and merged PRs. You see, both the OpenAI and the LangChain PyPI packages create new releases pretty much every day. So Dependabot detects these each night, and it generates PRs for each one. That in turn triggers more GitHub Actions jobs that manage the unit test and the QA for each of the PRs. So net, there's usually like somewhere between, say, a dozen completed jobs each morning. But much to my dismay, all the Python unit tests had failed. It turns out that basically this was just bad luck on my part. OpenAI was doing their first ever developer day in San Francisco. So unsurprisingly, they released a major update to their Python API, and as happens with so many startups, their ambitions get the best of them and they ship some buggy code. Their new release included a surprise-breaking change for anyone who's using LangChain in their project, and we do use LangChain in this project. And so this morning there was sadness and gloom throughout the land. But on the bright side, this did give us something tangible to illustrate the purpose of these automated workflows and controls we're about to see, plus what's involved in managing them. So, turning lemons into lemonade, let's track through the processes right now and see what did and didn't happen, and how to go about managing a real-life situation like this. It starts with Dependabot. And remember that we have this YAML configuration for it that governs what it's supposed to be doing for us. Dependabot sends you emails whenever it discovers a new release to a package that it monitors on your behalf. So this is kind of like step number one. It then creates a pull request with the version pen modification, and separately, I created GitHub Actions triggers that automatically invoke our unit test for all new PRs. But the PRs failed because the automated Python tests that they trigger all failed due to the problem with the new OpenAI API release. Fortunately, we can use the logs generated by GitHub Actions to research what actually broke, and then importantly, we can grab the exact error text from the Python exception stack trace. Googling this error text leads us to a LangChain AI GitHub issues page, where we can see that, unsurprisingly, lots of other people began encountering the same issue at the same time. This guy, me, reports that downgrading to the previous stable version resolves the issue. And so voila, we have a solution. We manually revert our requirements.txt to its previous version, save, commit, push, and then create our own PR to reverse the change in the main branch. And then, boom, we're back in business. But since this is an automated process, and there's not any reason to expect a problem to be resolved in the near term, we're going to need to figure out a way to plug the dike on this problem and prevent it from repeating itself. I asked CoPilot how to reconfigure dependabot.yaml so that it ignores the OpenAI packages for the time being, and it gave me this guidance. So we'll save, commit, push, and create a second PR in order to get the main branch stabilized until such time as we can confirm that the OpenAI and LangChain packages are working normally again. Okay, and more problems. So it gets better. As Murphy's Law would of course dictate, it turns out that I chose the day that ChatGPT gets hit with the mother of all DDoS attacks. What are the odds, right? So I lost more time trying to unravel that mystery, which wasn't particularly difficult because the attack made international news headlines. OpenAI did eventually get stuff working again later that day, and so, bam! Our processes are working smoothly again. Okay, so last thing, it'd be nice to see the Python test actually working again, and so we'll invoke those manually right now and cross our fingers. And, looks good! We're wrapped up. Alrighty, so fast forward one day, and we contrastingly can see what a regular day is supposed to look like. Some emails about new versions and merged PRs, a dozen completed GitHub Actions jobs, and some new commits in the main branch. And there was happiness and joy all about the land. But just so you know, I'm still tweaking things. This morning was the first time I'd done an automated semantic release since setting up the branch protection rules for the project, and I ended up having to make a minor adjustment to the create a new release GitHub action so that it would coerce GitHub into allowing it to automatically merge onto the main branch. It's not a big deal in the grand scheme of things, but in the interest of full transparency, you should know that I did run into that and I did have to tweak stuff. Also, last night, Dependabot sent me this curious email, and it reads, "The following labels could not be found. Automated PR." Well, turns out that this is a label that CoPilot had suggested for the Dependabot configuration. I've never actually added labels to a Dependabot configuration before, and I'm actually not even 100% sure what they are, since so far they've never worked. So let's see what CoPilot has to say about the email. Okay, well that's simple enough. We just need to add a label called Automated PR to the GitHub discussion page, and then hopefully we'll see a perfectly clean run tomorrow. I'm still going to call today's run a success though. Nothing failed, and so I'm pretty happy. Okay, that was GitHub Actions, Dependabot, Automated Unit Test, Mergify, Semantic Release, and what to do when the API you're using in your unit test gets hit by a DDoS attack. So, amazing! So summarizing our entire section 2 about automating the important stuff. Hopefully, this gives you a general idea about what to automate and to what ends and what's involved in getting it set up and how it can help you to better manage your code. All right, last section. Number 3, helping others understand your project. A lot of people will completely ignore a repo if its README is not any good or if it's blank, so be attentive to this. Good READMEs vary depending on the specifics of the project, so leverage other successful projects in similar ecosystems as a style guide. But be mindful of what the reader should and should not be expected to already know about you and your project, and then adapt accordingly. A popular project, like say the OpenAI Python API, it doesn't require much, if any, explanation about what it is and does, nor for that matter, who OpenAI is. But you'll probably need to put more effort into these things for your project. Visuals help projects that are comparatively unknown, like Marv the chatbot, for example. So add a screenshot or an animated screen recording to convey what the project does. You can also add badges at the top of the README for each of the major technologies that you use in the project. You can check out the first few lines of readme.md markdown in this repo to see how you add those. At a minimum, just make sure that your README covers these basics. A brief description of what your code does. A simple example use case. How to set it up and run the code. And if applicable, explain the kinds of external stuff that it needs, like say in this case, an OpenAI API key and an AWS CLI key pair. And lastly, how to report problems and how to contribute. Changelogs are especially helpful to someone who's unfamiliar with your project. Solely from this log, assuming that it's properly maintained, a reader can see what kinds of changes are being released, how many people are involved, what the review process looks like, the volume of changes per release, the frequency of releases, and so on. It can tell a complete story about your project if you do it well. And so, at the risk of being repetitive, this is a great way to earn the trust of others about your project. I'll remind you that in this repo, we're using Semantic Release to automatically generate the changelogs, and so this not only is a big time saver, but it also creates more detailed and way more consistent log entries than any human ever could. An issue template, contributing guide, PR template, code of conduct. There's even a way to add donation solicitations with the funding.yaml. I added a semantic versioning guide to this project. It's a helpful resource for anyone who wants to contribute to the project, but they're new to the rules of semantic versioning. These resources are aimed at standardizing and simplifying how others can get involved in your project. It provides others with the luxury of not having to reinvent the wheel on how to report a bug, donate money, contact you, whatever. I added a few links down below that you can follow to learn more about what kinds of things you can control from this special .github systems folder. So happy reading. You should add a license. At a minimum, this adds some professionalism to your project, and it conveys to the outside world that you take your project seriously. There's a half dozen different commonly used licenses for open source projects, with the most commonly used being MIT, Apache, and GNU. If you don't know what license to use, then just look for a similar project that's large and use whatever they're using. Do you have a strong opinion about how to choose a license? Well, then leave a comment down below. GitHub CoPilot is a fantastic resource for guidance on other ways that you can improve the setup of your GitHub repository. CoPilot can provide detailed explanations about pretty much anything in the world of GitHub. And it can also provide you with suggestions on how to set up some of the more arcane config files that you see here in the root of this repo. Every file that you see in the root of this repo plays some role in policy enforcement, testing behavior, automations, and configurations in general. CoPilot's amazing. You can open any of these files and you can ask it for an explanation, and it will give you a fantastic explanation about how it's being used in the context of this particular project. And if you feel so compelled, you might even be interested in checking out this GitHub CoPilot video that I did a few weeks ago. All right, that's it. I hope you found that helpful, and if you did, then please like and subscribe because that really helps with the YouTube algorithm. But more importantly, it ensures that you'll be made aware about more great videos like this one. And I will see you in the next video.